we saw how Adolf Hitler was being blackmailed by his nephew. His nephew was threatening to reveal to the public that his grandfather was a Jew, or at least half Jewish. So Hitler had requested from Hans Frank. Hans Frank was a friend of his, an old associate. He was also his personal lawyer, and he was a member of the Thule Society that had set up the Nazi Party in the beginning. All early members of the Nazi Party, all the early foundational members, belonged to the Thule Society. Thule Society had been founded by a person who called himself Rudolf von Sebottendorf, 1875-1945, who claimed to have received his instructions in Turkey from a Baktashi holy man. The Baktashi were a type of Muslims who lived in Turkey. They were actually descendants, or the spiritual heirs, one could say, of the old and mystery pagan religions that once prevailed in that portion of Turkey. And the Greek times, Gnosis and all that kind of mysticism. And after becoming Muslims, they continued in the same way, in their same type of beliefs, but they adapted them to with an Islamic veneer, one could say. And basically they had similar beliefs to what we would later find amongst the Sabtai and Jacob Frank. They believed that in order to bring redemption, one should commit sin. They were pagans in effect, type of pagans, and had their own type of mysticism. Rudolf von Sebottendorf had learnt with them, had been with them for a while, and he claimed to have received instructions from one of their holy men to go back and to found this Thule Society to wage war against the Jews. And that is what he was doing, and Hans Frank was an associate with him. Hans Frank had been with them, and Hans Frank, as the lawyer of Hitler, as a personal friend, was requested by Hitler to examine the claims, examine whether or not he had Jewish antecedents. And Frank proceeded to do this, and he found that Maria Schicklgruber, the grandmother of Adolf Hitler, Maria Schicklgruber, who had given birth to the father of Hitler, she had given birth to Alois out of wedlock. It was illegitimate in effect. Maria Schicklgruber had had an affair with someone called Leopold Frankenberger, who had been her employer, the son of her employer, and she had gotten in the family way through him. And they had been situated in the southeast portion of Austria. After she got knocked up, after she became pregnant, she went back to her homeland, she went back to her hometown, where she gave birth to Alois, and later Hitler would be destined to wipe her hometown and the town beside it off the map altogether, to use it as a shooting range, a firing range, to blast it to pieces. And so this is the story that Frank related. Frank also claimed that he told Hitler, Frank also told Hitler that Frankenberger could not be the father of Alois, but that Maria and the man she later married, in other words, the person who gave the Hitler name to Alois, was with a real father, was a real parent, but they concocted the story, they arranged the story as if to make it look as if the son of Frankenberger had been the culprit in order to get money from him, and consequently they did receive regular payments from the Frankenberger family to support the child. So this also raises questions. It does happen that people are accused of things like this, and they are falsely accused of fathering children, and they have to pay for them, and people, they are framed as if to say, And even if they know it's not true, they don't want a public scandal and so on. But it also happens that people don't usually pay money if they don't have something to pay for. As if there's not a certain degree of probability that the claims made about them are correct. So we can't say that this is not the case here. This is what we have. In general, the account of Frank is doubted. He said it when he was already in the course of the Nuremberg trials. He's about to be executed for his crimes. He may have been trying to manipulate the situation to put himself in the good books, one could say. We don't know. But nevertheless, there could be something to his story, and it seems there is. In the past, it was suggested that when what Frank claimed could not be true, since Jews were not in the region of Styria. Styria was where Maria Schickenberg was supposed to have been put in the family way by Frankenberger, by the son of Frankenberger, and there was supposed to be no Jews there, Jews having at an early time being expelled from there and not returned. And therefore, there could not be Jews in that area. So this is patently and obviously a false claim. It's a blanket. It's an attempt to cloud to evade the issue. First of all, we now have proof. It is now known that there actually were Jews in the area. They may not have been officially allowed to get there, to live there, but they were living there. So there were Jews in the area. And even if there were not Jews in the area, in the eyes of both Hans Frank and especially Adolf Hitler, being Jewish doesn't mean going to the synagogue every day. It can also mean someone who goes to the church but has Jewish parents. That too is considered Jews in their time. And that is what we seem to be talking about in this case. Would be in this area a group of Jews who converted to Christianity had settled. They may have belonged to the Frankist sect founded by Jacob Frank. And possible Jewish ancestors of Hitler should be sought amongst these people, and I will explain why. And this subject has not been examined in depth. Jews are not eager to reveal that Hitler may have been related to them. Jews don't want to admit that Hitler was related to them. If he was, that is why now it's an international incident has developed, because the Soviet Prime Minister suggested otherwise. The Jews are not eager to recognize Hitler as having any Jewish ancestry. And many Gentiles in Europe share this sentiment. Hitler was responsible for the Holocaust. The Germans have apologized. They've attempted to make some degree of restitution, to purify themselves, one might say. But in the hearts of hearts, a lot of Germans are actually proud of what happened, admit to what happened, and they have an admiring for Hitler. They do not want to see their hero with some type of Jewish blemish. In their eyes, he should remain in the public view as a 100% Aryan without any trace of Jewish ancestry. And this sentiment seems to affect historians and academics and others for all kinds of reasons. There's not a good deal of enthusiasm about examining in depth, in real depth, the possible non-Aryan, the possible Semitic Jewish ancestors of Hitler. At all events, the indications are that Hitler may have had Jewish ancestry and may be connected to Jacob Frank, and Jacob Frank was a disciple of Shabtai Zvi, who also may have some connection, as we shall see. Who was Shabtai Zvi? Shabtai Zvi, 1626-1676, in other words, the 1600s, about the time of Oliver Cromwell and Charles I in England, in other words, some time away. Even Shabtai Zvi's father, the father of Shabtai Zvi, was a merchant in Greece, the Jewish city in Greece that once existed, where they had a port where they used to trade with, it was an emporium for trade, And the father of Shabtai Zvi worked with the British agents, with the British merchants, and some of them were Puritans, and some of them had a belief that they were called fifth monarchy men, and some of them had believed the Messiah, or in their terminology, the return of the Messiah was going to come any day. And it's been suggested that the father of Shabtai Zvi may have been affected with this, and Shabtai Zvi himself influenced by it. At all events, when he was a child, he apparently had some type of accident or something happened to him. His testicles were damaged, and he had epileptic fits. He was a bit crazy, but he's also charismatic. He also attracted a lot of people to him. A lot of people were influenced by him. He also had a belief in some type of doctrine that said that in order to hasten the redemption, one needed to commit sin. In other words, you have to do evil in order that the Messiah will come quickly. But this aspect of his teaching was not widely known at the beginning, and had many followers, many people. The Jews were in a very serious situation. They were being persecuted and oppressed, and things were quite difficult, and they were hoping that the Messiah would come and save them. And they heard of Shabtai Zvi, and all kinds of wondrous stories were told about him, and a lot of Jews believed in him, without knowing this other section of his secret doctrine that later became public, of having to do sin in order to be redeemed. Eventually, in Turkey, the Ottoman Empire at that time ruled over Southeast Europe, so Shabtai Zvi was forced by the Turks, the Ottoman Turks, to convert to Islam, to become a Muslim, and some of his followers also followed him. They converted to Islam. But after that, they continued, or some of them continued, including Shabtai Zvi himself, to associate with religious Jews. So he was banished. From the area. There were some followers of Shabtai remained Muslims, but they also had retained their original Shabtaian doctrines, and they created a society or a group known as the Donmi, which still exists in Turkey and has been important in some areas, and it's still there. And they also intermixed with the Baktashi. These are Muslim group, fanatics, a Muslim sect, sections of which have a kind of devil worshipping or similar antinomian, it's called, doing bad in order to bring the redemption. So some of the Baktashi also have this doctrine, and they intermingled with the Donmi, with the followers of Shabtai. Now Shabtai himself may have been influenced by them from the start. After Shabtai Zvi became a Muslim, he still had followers amongst the conventional Jews. Some Jews still believed in him. There were different groups of them. Some of them were mainstream, regular people. Others also believed in the idea of committing transgressions in order to bring on redemption. Gershom Sholem, 1897 to 1982, he authored numerous studies on Shabtai Zvi and his offshoots. And others also have done the same. It has been a favourite theme amongst many academics in Israel. It had importance and influence on a lot of Jewish history. So it is relatively well known, and you can look it up in encyclopedias on the internet. There's a lot of articles about it. This brings us to Jacob Yosef Frank, also known as Yaakov Leibowitz, 1726-1791. He was born in the West Ukraine. He was Jewish. He was part of the Polish. When he was at that time, the Ukraine belonged to the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Poland and Lithuania were one country, and at that time they ruled over the Ukraine. Shabtai Zvi had followers in that area. Joseph Frank belonged to a family that adhered to Shabtai Zvi. And he presented himself as a reincarnation of Shabtai Zvi, a reincarnation, the inherited reincarnation of Shabtai Zvi. And he was active in the southern Polish-Ukrainian provinces of Podol and Galicia. He also traveled through the Ottoman Turkish territories. He made contacts with members of the Donmi, the former followers of Shabtai Zvi who become Muslims. He learned from them. And in the Ukraine he was active among others who were of similar persuasion. And so he was making trouble. So the local rabbis, the Orthodox rabbis, took action against him and his followers. They ostracized him. They excommunicated him. They forbade any Jew to have any intercourse with him, to trade with them, to help them, to associate with them. And this was placed them in danger. So Frank, he sought the protection of the Catholic bishop, Kamieniec Podolski, in Poland, and he was accepted. He was the local bishop, Catholic bishop, protected him, and Frank then began to incite against religious Jews. He claimed that the Talmud allowed. Frank said that the religious Jews were in the practice of killing Christian children. As a result of this, 10,000 volumes of the Talmud were burnt, and the whole Jewish community was placed in danger of extinction. And anti-Semites throughout the ages have repeated this slur against the Jews, against the Talmud. And this is not true, this is incorrect. I have read the Talmud at some degree, at some level, at least 3 times through, and there's nothing there that is offensive, that says what the anti-Semite says it says, but they misinterpret things that say something else altogether. That's another point. Many of the Franks converted to Christianity, especially Catholicism. Frank himself was imprisoned for 15 years on charges of heresy. After that he was released. He moved to Vienna in Austria, head of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and he held the court there with his daughter Eva, and the Frankists under Frank and his daughter were in contact with the royal members of the royal household of Austro-Hungarian Empire. Even the Tsar of Russia, or the future Tsar of Russia, came to visit him, so too the royalty of Prussia paid visits. Nobility paid visits to them. They aroused a lot of interest, and they were attracted to them. Eva herself was apparently an attractive woman, and some of them had affairs with her. Eventually Frank died, and his daughter Eva took over. Then Eva got into trouble with the money matters, and she fled and disappeared. But the Frankists themselves, they remained among the Jews, or they assimilated amongst the Gentiles. Most of them assimilated amongst the Gentiles. Those who assimilated amongst the Jews, according to Gershom Scholem, later helped create the Jewish Reform movement, Reform movement. According to Gershom Scholem, he is an academic, noted academic. He's not religious. He's secular. He's a secular type, and he himself brings evidence in his works that the followers of Frank and of Shabtai Tzvi helped create the Jewish Reform movement, or their families. And now we have no real proof that Hitler was related to Jacob Frank, other than the involvement of Hans Frank and the name Frankenberger. The Hans Frank himself was named, had the same name of Frank. This is significant. There may be a connection. Also, Frank said that the putative father of Alois, who impregnated Maria Schicklgruber, that his name was Frankenberger. We have the repetition of the same Frankenberger. And Jacob Frank and his followers last in the general area of southern Germany and Austria, they came across the names Frank, Hans Frank, Frankenberger. We also notice a connection of the Nazis with the Tuli Society, and they with the Baktashi in Turkey, and of the early Nazis, all being linked up together. So this suggests some kind of link to the Jewish false Messiah, Shabtai Tzvi, and the person who claimed to be his reincarnation, Jacob Frank. Another possibility concerns Clara, the mother of Adolf. Alois, the father of Adolf, at the age of 36, had first married a 50-year-old widow. And she was an invalid, but she was rich, so he married her. And then he began an affair with a maid known as Francesca. Alois at that time had many such licenses. He was a ladies' man, jumping around from one lady to another. Alois separated from the widow, and Francesca, the maid, moved in. After that, the young Clara Potzel, young Clara Potzel, was a distant cousin of Alois. She also became a maid. She served in the house of Alois and Francesca. Francesca was jealous. Apparently, Alois was paying attention to his cousin, or his distant cousin, who always referred to him as uncle. So Francesca had Clara sent away, and at the age of 17, Clara went to Vienna. Meanwhile, the widow died, so Alois married Francesca. After the marriage, Francesca became sick, so Clara was called back from Vienna. She moved into the house to look after Francesca. Francesca died too, so Alois married Clara, who at the time was 3 months pregnant. Alois fathered several children from Clara. A few of them died. Quite a few of them died in childbirth. Some, at least one of them, was a person who needed to be kept in seclusion because he was what is called some type of freak in the eyes of Hitler, and that this also could reflect upon why Hitler was believed in the eugenic programs, putting away people who were imperfectly born, putting them away, killing them off, because he himself had a brother and other members of the family who were borderline cases in that direction. Alois, the father of Hitler, was in the habit of beating his wife and his children, and also bullying his neighbours. He was quite a nasty person. And meanwhile, we know that Clara had spent an unchaperoned year in Vienna. She had been in Vienna. It's not certain how she supported herself, but she had been there. Well, she may have had some kind of liaison with a Jew. And this connection may have been intermittently confirmed because Hitler seemed to be getting funds throughout his youth and the different periods when he was growing up from unknown sources. At all events, Hitler believed that when an Aryan woman, a non-Jewish woman, had intercourse with someone of a lower race, she was empowered for life. And this was in effect accepted science at the time. Even Darwin, the great scientist Darwin believed in. He believed in connection with animals. Darwin said that if you had a pedigree animal that has intercourse with a mongrel with the same type of animal, a bit of a lower type, the pedigree female is empowered for the rest of her existence. And Darwin writes about this, and Adolf Hitler also believed in it. And it may be that Clara had some kind of connection with the Jew, and Hitler knew about it, and always thought there was something wrong with him, even though genetically there could be no connection because of the time that had elapsed between one event and the other. At all events, Hitler was very attached to his mother. He's attached to Clara. He always kept a picture of Clara with him, whether in his pocket or in his room, and he used to reminiscence with his friends, even into his old age, of how happy he had been in his childhood to sneak into the bed of his mother whilst his father was away at work. Adolf Hitler in Vienna took courses in a lot of different subjects, expensive courses, things that an ordinary person would not be able to allow himself to take courses in because of the expense in our time. But Hitler did it, and one of the things he did courses in was conjuring at a professional level. And one of the principles of conjurers is to distract attention from one point in order not to be noticed, to distract attention from what they wish not to be noticed, and they create distractions elsewhere. And perhaps the whole thing with the story of Hans Frank and Maria Schlickelberger and alloys had been designed to distract attention from the real source of admixture in the heritage of Hitler through Clara. Who knows? At all events, this is what we have, and it's an open question, and it needs more study, and more study could be done on it, should be done about it, and ideological barriers should be overcome because more study is need to be done on this subject. Now we in Brit-Am finds the lost 10 tribes amongst Western nations, and we have criteria concerning who belongs to the lost 10 tribes and who don't. They originally had 12 tribes of Israel divided into two. The northern 10 tribes separated from the southern 2 tribes. From the southern 2 tribes come the present-day Jewish people. The northern 10 tribes were conquered by the Assyrians, taken into exile in portions of the Assyrian Empire and disappeared. We have proven that they moved to the west. They moved and they had to be found amongst Western peoples. And this is confirmed by the Bible, by rabbinical sources, and also by archaeology, linguistics, and historical proofs. Now it happens that we find the members of the lost 10 tribes in certain areas, and they move on to another area. We're not certain whether they all moved on, or most of them remain behind. And so here and there we have to make decisions about who belongs to the lost 10 tribes and who doesn't. So we use criteria. And the criteria have proven themselves, they work. So the criteria as to who does not belong to the lost 10 tribes, they include that the blessings that Scripture promised, certain blessings that would accrue, that would come unto the 10 tribes in their places of exile, economic and physical blessings. So we have to find people who have been blessed in these ways, in the indicated ways. Additional indications of Scripture, that is the second point. Groundwork as history, archaeology, and related proofs showing paths on migration of those lost 10 tribes, at least having been in that region, sojourned in that region, passed through that region. They also have to have Judah, an affinity with the Jews, a relatively lack of anti-Semitism. They also need some degree of originality, innovation, intellect, to have been a civilizing influence, to have empathy, have been done social justice in their regular affairs, evolved, at least as they evolved into the modern era. To believe in social justice, they have to have some degree of Israelite self-identification, somehow or other to consider themselves the chosen people or related to the Israelites, to some degree, at least to some portion of important groups within their population. They also need to have family connection. That is, they need to be ethnically related to other groups whose belonging to those 10 tribes has been proven, and they need tribal affiliation, that in some way or another we may be able to identify them with specific Israelite tribes, because the tribes, when they moved, more or less remained separate, and tribal characteristics remained. Now, out of these criteria, we mentioned number 4, Judah. They need affinity with the Jews. They have to show a relatively sympathy for the Jewish people, and to have been relatively less anti-Semitic historically and also in the present time as compared to their natures, and when taking into recognition the different historical circumstances around them. And these criteria work. So this point about the Jews of being relatively less anti-Semitic was just to take into consideration historical circumstances, comparing them to other peoples around them. But it does show that a nation that belongs to the lost 10 tribes will generally, or nearly in every case, to some degree be pro-Jewish, and at least be less anti-Semitic than the other peoples around them. But there are exceptions. So this whole thing, we should know there are exceptions. Even amongst the Jews themselves, amongst the Jews we find people who are against their own people, who are anti-Semitic, or people who are part Jewish or anti-Semitic. And we find this amongst Jews who we know are Jews, or who are believed to be Jews, accepted as Jews. So too, can we allow for the same amongst the lost 10 tribes of Israel? In other words, even though on the whole, this criteria concerning being less anti-Semitic than would be expected to be more pro-Jewish as compared to other peoples around them, this law in general holds. There may be exceptions. We have to take into account the possibility of exceptions, because we see exceptions occurring. May the Lord God of Israel bless you. Thank you.